Here's a striking statistic that might surprise you. While 91% of Georgians personally believe that women should be free to make choices about when and whom they marry, only 72% think their community shares this view. This 19 percentage point gap reveals something profound about Georgian society. There's a significant disconnect between what people actually believe and what they think their neighbors believe. Welcome to the CRRC-Georgia podcast. Considering this disconnect between personal beliefs and assumptions around community perceptions in Georgia regarding gender dynamics, we're asking the question, just how conservative are Georgians really? This phenomenon isn't unique to marriage attitudes. Across many dimensions of gender equality measured in a comprehensive 2024 study, Georgians consistently underestimate how progressive their fellow citizens actually are. Today, we'll explore this perceptual gap and what it means for understanding the true state of gender attitudes in Georgia. Our analysis is based on the 2024 Gender Equality Attitudes Study conducted by CRRC-Georgia for UN Women, which surveyed Georgian citizens about their personal beliefs and their perceptions of community norms across 10 key areas of gender equality. Before we dive into the findings, let's establish the methodological foundation of this research. The Gender Equality Attitudes Study was conducted from January 20th to February 19th, 2024, using a multi-stage stratified cluster sampling method. CRRC Georgia conducted 1,238 face-to-face interviews with individuals aged 16 and above across Georgia in the Georgian, Armenian, and Azerbaijani languages. The study's strength lies in its dual approach. It measured both individual attitudes, what people personally believe, and perceived social norms, what people think their community believes. This methodology allows us to identify what social scientists call pluralistic ignorance, the phenomenon where individuals incorrectly perceive others' attitudes as different from their own when they are actually quite similar. The survey covered 10 key areas: education, work and employment, leadership and participation, marriage and family life, safety and violence, healthcare, control over one's life, personal finances, access to physical property, and future ideals. With a margin of error of 2.9%, the results are representative of Georgia's adult population. Now let's examine the complex patterns revealed by the study. The data shows varying degrees of alignment between individual beliefs and perceived community views across different issues, with some topics showing remarkable consensus, while others reveal significant misperceptions. On certain issues, Georgians demonstrate striking alignment between personal views and perceived community beliefs. Take attitudes around domestic violence. Only 6% personally believe there are acceptable circumstances for hitting a spouse, while 9% believe their community holds similar views. This small gap suggests Georgians have a relatively accurate read on their society's strong opposition to domestic violence. Additionally, regarding gender roles within families, personal beliefs closely mirror perceived community standards. While 52% personally agree that men should have the final say in the family, 53% believe this traditional view dominates their community's thinking, a difference of just 1 percentage point. However, other issues reveal dramatic gaps between individual beliefs and perceived community attitudes. On economic gender roles, 42% personally endorse the idea that a man's job is to earn money while a woman's job is to look after the house and family. Yet, 57% perceive this as their community's prevailing belief, a 15-point disparity suggesting many Georgians underestimate the degree to which their society holds progressive views on women's economic participation. The most striking disconnect appears around inheritance rights. Only 19% of Georgians believe inheritance should be given to a son over a daughter, yet nearly half, 46%, believe their community favors sons receiving more, a massive 27-point gap between reality and perception. These findings reveal a nuanced picture. While Georgians can closely approximate perceived community attitudes on some issues, such as domestic violence and family decision making, they significantly overestimate their society's conservatism on others, particularly economic gender roles and inheritance equality. This suggests that Georgia's conservative reputation, both internally and internationally, may be partially based on misperceptions rather than actual widespread conservative beliefs, at least on certain issues. Regarding the workplace in Georgia, we see both genuine progressive consensus and areas where traditional views persist. On the positive side, 83% of Georgians agree that having a paid job is the best way for a woman to achieve independence. However, this coexists with more traditional perspectives. 75% believe women cannot take on certain professions, and 71% think women should work less to devote more time to family. Questions about leadership present an interesting case study in perceived versus actual conservatism. When asked about political leadership, 50% personally believe men are better political leaders than women. However, 58% believe their community supports this opinion. While this 8 percentage point gap is smaller than in other areas, it still suggests that support for male political leadership may be somewhat overstated. What's particularly noteworthy is that when Georgians are asked directly about supporting specific candidates, 57% to 72% say a person's sex doesn't matter depending on a range of leadership positions, from mayor of a city, with 57% stating sex doesn't matter, to CEO of a private company, 66%, to the role of parliamentarian, 72%. Among those who do express a preference, men are favored, but the majority of Georgians appear genuinely indifferent to candidate gender, a more progressive stance than abstract questions suggesting a superiority of male leadership would suggest. This complexity reminds us that attitudes toward gender equality aren't monolithic. People can paradoxically hold progressive views about women's economic independence while maintaining traditional perspectives about family roles and professional segregation. Perhaps nowhere is the gap between progressive ideals and traditional practices more evident than in attitudes towards sexual autonomy. This area reveals both the persistence of double standards and significant misperceptions about community attitudes. The data shows a stark gender double standard in sexual behavior. 51% of Georgians consider premarital sex justifiable for men, while only 31% extend the same acceptance to women. For multiple sexual partners, the gap narrows but persists. 36% for men versus 24% for women. However, the perceived social norms tell a different story. Georgians believe their communities are even more restrictive toward women's sexual autonomy than they are personally. Only 18% think their community finds women's premarital sex acceptable, compared to the 31% who personally find it justifiable. This 13 percentage point gap suggests that even those who personally accept women's sexual freedom believe they're in a small minority. Perceived norms for men's sexual behavior are more aligned with personal attitudes. 47% think their community accepts men's premarital sex, close to the 51% who personally accept it. This alignment for men, but not women, suggests that conservative attitudes towards female sexuality are perceived as more socially enforced than they actually are. These patterns have profound implications. If people believe they're isolated in supporting sexual equality, they may be less likely to openly advocate for these positions or to challenge discriminatory practices. On the other hand, if people believe support for such positions is held by only a small minority, they may feel that sexist and misogynist attitudes are permissible or even encouraged. The study reveals clear demographic patterns that help explain both the actual distribution of progressive attitudes and the persistence of conservative perceptions. Women consistently hold more progressive views than men across virtually every domain measured. They're more likely to support workplace gender equality, women's political participation, and shared family responsibilities. Interestingly, women are more congruent in their perceptions of social norms. Their estimates of community conservatism are generally closer to actual individual attitudes than men's estimates. Age represents perhaps the strongest predictor of attitudes, with a clear generational divide. Georgians under 35 demonstrate markedly more progressive views on gender roles, employment equality, and family responsibilities. This generational difference suggests that Georgian society is undergoing a gradual but significant attitudinal shift that may not be fully recognized by older generations who continue to influence perceptions of social norms. Geographic location also matters significantly. Tbilisi residents consistently express more progressive attitudes, while rural populations tend toward more traditional views. However, even rural Georgians often hold more progressive personal views than they attribute to their communities, suggesting that geographic stereotypes about rural conservatism may be somewhat exaggerated. Education and employment status create additional progressive clusters. Employed individuals and those with a higher education demonstrate greater support for gender equality across all domains, while also more closely estimating their community's perceptions as less conservative than unemployed or less educated individuals believe. So, just how conservative are Georgians actually? The answer is more nuanced than public discourse might suggest. While traditional attitudes certainly persist, particularly regarding family roles and women's sexuality, Georgian society appears more progressive regarding certain questions about gender roles than even most Georgians realize. This perception to reality gap has significant implications for social change. When progressive minded individuals believe they're isolated, they're less likely to speak out or challenge discriminatory practices. Conversely, when people understand that their egalitarian views are more widely shared than they thought, they may feel emboldened to express these views more openly. And on the other hand, if people perceive their community to be far more conservative than is the reality, they may feel that sexist and misogynist beliefs are permissible or even encouraged. The study suggests that addressing this misperception could accelerate social change through what social psychologists call the social norms approach, showing people that progressive attitudes are more common than they think, thereby encouraging more open expression of these views. The question, how conservative are Georgians actually, ultimately reveals more about our perceptions than our reality. And that gap between perception and reality may be where the greatest opportunities for positive social change lie. Thank you for joining us in the CRRC-Georgia podcast. For the full report and analysis, visit our website at crrc.ge and follow us on social media at CRRC-Georgia. Until next time.